Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's program brought to you by the U.S. Botanic Garden. My name is Courtney Barris, and I am the online education specialist with the Learning and Outreach team here at the USBG. We're so happy to have you joining us today for fascinating fall foliage, trees, and more with Angela Weber-Hetrick of the USBG and Melissa Westbrook of Capitol Grounds and Arboretum. Are you all ready? Let me introduce our presenters. So, Angela Weber Hetrick has 15 years and more of horticulture experience and currently oversees the outdoor collections at the U.S. Botanic Garden. Prior to the garden, Angela worked for gardens such as Mount Vernon, Norfolk Botanical Garden, and Longwood Gardens. Today, we also have Melissa Westbrook, and she is the urban forester at U.S. Capitol Grounds in Arboretum. Melissa manages Arboretum programs, including urban forestry operations, curation of living collections, and plant records. They've come together today as neighbors here on the Hill to present our program, Fascinating Foliage. Let's first hear from Angela. Hey, Angela.
Hello.
Hey
Hi, everyone.
there.
Okay. All right.
Good
Well,
to
welcome,
have
everyone,
you.
and thanks for joining us here. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So I want to talk about a bunch of the beautiful fall trees that we have blooming right now here at the Botanic Garden, or seeing their beautiful fall foliage. So one of my personal favorites is the Carpinus carolinea. Its common name is the American hornbeam or ironwood. This tree is in our hornbeam alley, and it's absolutely stunning and beautiful. It creates a beautiful shade canopy. We have about a dozen of them that line this walkway, and it's just so beautiful to see right now, going into its fall color. So yeah, just a really stunning, beautiful shade tree. Next slide, please. Oh, a really beautiful tree here at the Botanic Garden, the Taxodium ascendens, or commonly known as pond cypress. This tree is located in our gated outdoor gardens area, which is adjacent, which these trees are lined right next to our rose garden as well. We have another alley of them, beautiful trees, and they turn this like bronzy color with their needles, and eventually they do drop, but we get a really nice show of their fall color. Next slide, please. So another really fun, beautiful tree that we have out here in the regional garden, the Tilia americana, also known as the American linden. Really great tree, another beautiful shade tree. It's great because it is pretty easy to care for. Disease and pest, generally no pest and disease issues. And it's generally just really easy to care for, and they can live generally a pretty long time, roughly 150 years, with given the right cultural requirements and just given the right care. So another reason for why I love having this tree in our regional garden. Next slide, please. So another amazing one too that we have here. I guess I've got too many to pick from. I love having all these trees right here in our regional garden. Of course, I can never have one favorite. So the Quercus voltina, the black oak. So this one is really spectacular too. I love how it gets that reddish orange tinge of color on the leaves, as temperatures start changing. So this one also can live a pretty long time. I want to say almost like 200 years or so, given always the correct cultural requirements and care. But yeah, this also is another spectacular one. I feel like I can't get enough of the fall color out here in the regional garden. Next slide, please. So another really cool tree that we have is the river birch, or Betula nigra. So this tree, the foliage or the bark on it is really interesting, really cool texture, really interesting to see out here in the regional garden. And this one is near so many of the others that I've just briefly spoke about. So visiting the regional garden, it's really important to just come and check out some of these really interesting trees, their fall color, and just see how they change from season to season. Next slide, please. Yeah, so another early one that starts changing very early for us is the Cornus Florida, or commonly known as the flowering dogwood. Out here in the regional garden, this one in particular seems to start changing its color roughly as soon as September for us here in Washington, D.C. I started noticing it about probably mid-September for us, and it holds its color particularly pretty long, which is great. So you really get that lasting color through, I would say, almost early November, mid-November. So, and then leaves would start dropping, but you'll have that beautiful red color for a pretty long time, which is awesome to have here. So, and this again is also found in our regional garden. Next slide, please. Another really cool one here. We have the Asculus flava, which commonly known as the yellow buckeye. This one is also found in our regional garden. And this one is not too far from, if you were to walk through our garden, near the river birches, the dogwoods. Yeah, so many to choose and look at while you're walking through the regional garden. This one gets more of a yellow golden color to its leaves as it starts changing through the season. So another spectacular tree to see while you're out and exploring in our garden. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have the Quercus margarita, commonly known as the sandpost oak. So this tree is pretty slow in growing. And again, this is in our regional garden. This is not too far from some of the others I've just spoke about, but it does get more of a red color to its leaves as it starts changing. Next slide, please. And so this one here, the Cercis canadensis, commonly known as the redbud. I'm sure everyone is very familiar with the pop of color it gets in early spring. And then the fall color is just as great because of the yellow, the lime green leaves it gets in our fall. So it's just, you almost get like 2 seasons out of it, for just sheer color. And this one, again, is also found in our regional garden. So this one is really just spectacular in many seasons. Next slide, please. Okay, so, and if you're looking for something for more than just color, you have the Asimina triloba with pawpaw. So this is also found in our regional garden. So it's great. Many people love the taste of pawpaw. So if you're not just looking for color, which this tree gets, a beautiful golden yellow color, you could also get tasty fruit too from this tree. So another reason why it's so great to have so much diversity in our regional garden here. Next slide, please. And we also have the Diospyros virginiana, commonly known as the American persimmon. This tree is also found in our regional garden, not too far from the river birches. The leaves itself, they are like a golden orangey tone color. So really beautiful. The fruit is delicious too. The wildlife loves it. So it's just a great tree to have. It doesn't get overly large, so it's just also a nice specimen to have here. And it's great to have in the regional garden. And next slide, please.
That looks like that is it for, I'm sure there's so many more trees, but let's go back to that last tree that you talked about with us. We do have a couple of questions from the chat.
Sure.
Angela, this was beautiful. It felt like we were just kind of taking a walk through the garden. If you all are ever around, just come on, take a walk. This was a nice little virtual idea of what we could get. Here are some questions that we have here. So, do squirrels eat the buckeye nuts? Like,
They
so,
will, yep, for
yeah,
sure. Yep. I mean, the wildlife, the squirrels, I mean, they'll eat a little bit of everything out here. I mean, I know
yeah,
they've nibbled on, the buckeye fruit, they've nibbled the persimmon. I mean, you name it, they'll eat a little bit of everything.
yeah. Now, just speaking of, I kind of just came from outside, right? But the fall color seems to come later and later in DC. Do
It
you
is,
see that? Yeah,
yes. So obviously it depends on temperature and different things. So like right now, we are starting, it's not peak color yet. So I would say probably another 2 to 3 weeks, we might have peak color. So it's all about, temperature driven, that sort of thing. is really what drives as the leaves start senescing and changing their fall color to their fall color.
Gotcha, gotcha. So what we'll do is, oh, actually, you know what? Right before we go on to you, Melissa, let's ask one more question from the chat. We have a participant that's going to be in the regional garden actually later on today. So
Oh my
what's showing out the very most? You know, where should they go?
God. Oh, well, okay. They need to do a whole walk of the whole garden if they have
Yeah, of
time.
course.
If they have time. So check out the dogwoods, check out the redbud, check out, do a whole walk around the whole space. It shouldn't take more than probably 15 minutes or so to really get a full fall color, dose of their fall color. But yeah, everything looks spectacular right now, and it's a beautiful fall day. It's crisp, so dress warm.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
for
so
sure.
they'll get the full fall experience.
For sure, for sure. Thank you so much, Angela. We'll get right back to you at the end for our final Q&A. But we're passing it on to Melissa. Melissa, we're looking forward to hearing about the trees at the U.S. Capitol grounds in Arboretum.
Yeah,
Take it
thank you,
away.
Courtney, and
Yeah.
thank you, Angela. Great overview of some of the trees in the USBG gardens. Some of them are going to be duplicate in my presentation, so um, hopefully that'll give you all a chance to see some of the most exciting specimens. As Courtney mentioned, my name is Melissa Westbrook. I'm the urban forester with the U.S. Capitol grounds in Arboretum, and I'm going to go over some of the more exciting or specimen trees that we have on the grounds that are great for fall color display. The first one, which is our most populated species actually on the grounds, is the northern red oak, or Quercus rubra. I've included a map here to kind of help highlight for you all where you're going to see the most occurring areas of Quercus rubra on the grounds. So this species was used extensively in the design for the Senate parks around the 1930s, 1940s. So a lot of the trees that you're going to see on the grounds, although many of them have been replaced, some with Quercus rubra. More recently, we've been kind of switching out species to help address an issue of a monoculture, as you can see. But a lot of them are really big, old red oaks. So they have fabulous color. They're just really large specimens and great trees, and provide a ton of shade also in the summer. So if you're walking out towards Union Station, keep an eye out for the red oaks this time of year. They're just now starting to change color. Another one of my favorites, probably my favorite fall color tree is the ginkgo. We've got a number of them on the grounds. The most exciting ones that you're going to see are actually some of our historic specimens that were planted during the tenure and design of Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. for the U.S. Capitol grounds. Probably the biggest one we have, you'll notice that one in that center image, which is just across from the U.S. Supreme Court, which just creates a lovely backdrop for this tree in the fall. And really is a great demonstration if you look at those pictures of the process of which trees change colors. So as the temperatures get colder and the nights longer and days shorter, photosynthesis starts shutting down. And so those green pigments that you're seeing, kind of remnants in those leaves, are starting to disappear. And some of the other pigments, the yellow pigments, flavonoids and carotenoids, are starting to pop out. So that's a really great demonstration of that there. We also have a whole lot of maples, and these are just several of them, but we've got probably, I don't know, I'd say 30 distinct species in this taxa, in the genera Maple, Acer. Red maples are a really big one for us. So we have tons of red maples planted not only right around the Capitol grounds, but also in Senate parks, as well as in the House parks. There are a lot of red maples in the House upper parks. And we've got a lot of cultivars of them. So I've just listed out some of the most popular ones that we use here. Probably October Glory is the most tried and true for many municipalities as well, but it has a really spectacular fall color. Japanese maples are another one. We've got a number of different taxas, Japanese maples as well as some other variegated Asiatic maples that are really wonderful fall colors. Some of the specimens that I have displayed here are right around the terrace wall of the U.S. Capitol building. Several of them are historic, so they would have been planted around the tenure of Olmsted. Others have been more recently added, probably in like 1980s. Sugar maples, probably the most iconic fall color tree, particularly in the Northeast. A lot of folks, I think, are starting to think about how the impacts of climate change are maybe pushing species like sugar maples a little bit further north of our region. We've had a lot of success, not necessarily with straight species, but using some of these cultivars that are a little bit better adapted for our warmer summers and periods of drought. And they still do give pretty great fall color, provided we don't have a terrible drought all summer long. And another one of my favorite ones that we're really just starting to use on the grounds and newly planted on Capitol Square is the Florida maple, which is actually a subspecies of sugar maple. Has a very similar color to the sugar maple, but it's just really better adapted to deal with heat. Angela also mentioned persimmon, so it has really wonderful fall color, lovely yellow leaves, but my favorite thing about persimmons is that fruit that comes on in the fall. If you first note the fruit when it's coming on in the fall, the fruits are a little bit hard and they have a very astringent flavor, but they will hold on to the tree for quite a long time. And after we get a good hard frost, the fruit really starts to soften and the sugars really start to convert from starch to sugar, and they get really sweet and delicious. And yeah, the squirrels do love them. Sweet gums are another one that we've got, particularly in the area just south of the Capitol, near Union Square. We have a couple of really large sweet gum specimens, and we're also planting lots of new ones in the house parks as well. We sometimes, when we're using them as street trees, we try to look for a lot of the fruitless cultivars. So Rotunda loba is one, as well as Hapdell, that are pretty consistently fruitless. We have a lot of straight species as well around the Capitol itself that still have those really fun little gumball fruits on them. Black gum is another one that we use really often. I mentioned that we had a large monoculture of red oaks in Senate Parks, and we've been sort of trying to integrate more diversity into our collections. And one of the species that we're using to do that is a black gum, or a Nyssa sylvatica. Again, there's a lot of really great cultivars there that have really fabulous displays of vibrant red fall color. One of my favorite trees, actually on the grounds, is featured right here in this picture on the left. It is a Liriodendron tulipifera, or a tulip tree. This is actually a tree that was original to Frederick Law Olmsted's tenure at the U.S. Capitol, so it would have been planted between 1874 and 1894. We have, I think, 3 tulip trees left from Olmsted's era that are still on the grounds, but this is the largest by far, and it has really the most beautiful architecture, I think. And these trees get this, you'll see the foliage here on the right, this kind of lovely yellow to brown fading foliage in the fall, with those little Samara helicopters that come flying off the tree and are always very painful to step on if you don't wear shoes, which I often like to walk around barefoot in my yard, and I have a couple tulip trees. And this tree is located actually right across from the Russell Building on the Capitol Square, on the east side of the Capitol Building. And then a couple other smaller trees that are some of my favorites. The sourwood. It's got such a fabulous bloom on it that comes on in the spring, and it really kind of holds on and then gets this really vibrant red color in the fall. Angela also mentioned pawpaw. We've started planting a lot more pawpaws in Senate Parks. So if you're walking through there, hopefully in a few years, you'll start to notice that trees hopefully will be laden with fruit come end of summer. Those are some of the more popular cultivars that we're planting in Senate Parks right now. And sassafras, also one of my favorites. So sassafras, interestingly enough, was used historically in the designs by Frederick Law Olmsted. So where Olmsted would have used a sassafras on the grounds and we've lost them, we replant them. So we've got, I think, probably 5 pretty good specimen sassafras. They're a small tree. I think the biggest one that I've seen has maybe been like 20 feet. Ours are not quite that big, but they're getting there. So really lovely trees, and unfortunately, sassafras is a species that is now being impacted by laurel wilt. So hoping that we don't see that come onto the grounds anytime soon. And I think that is it for me.
All right, you've given us plenty of feast for the eyes today. That's for sure. That's for sure. Of course, there are a lot of questions in the chat, so thanks so much, Melissa. Let's get it going here. All righty. Um, Melissa, someone in the chat wants to know how can you explain which ginkgo I should get to avoid a smelly one? Because apparently now these ginkgos are doing more fruit, and is that even normal?
Yeah, so
Okay, okay,
ginkgos are a dioecious species, so there are separate male and female plants.
okay.
Um, and so the way to avoid getting smelly ginkgo fruit is to make sure that you have a male tree. If you're
Ah,
buying trees from a nursery, usually they're going to sell you a male tree. So I think there's a couple cultivars, like President is maybe one, a couple other ones. I've
yeah.
heard that they don't stay reliably male. Sometimes they revert female. I
Okay.
think the fruit's great. It's actually very delicious if you roast the nuts on the ginkgo.
Oh,
It is a little smelly, but that's just it's part of nature, you know.
okay. Very cool. And just speaking of cultivars, some folks in the chat were just wanted to know, like, what do you look for, or like, how do you choose the cultivars or learn about them?
Yeah, so there are a lot of reference material out there. Y'all are probably familiar with Michael Durr. He is kind of the guy about all cultivars and all things trees in the United States. He's done a lot of
Mm,
research and trials on numerous cultivars that are more southernly oriented. So he's got a couple books that are great reference materials for cultivars, but I mean, the industry is like constantly evolving. There are new releases for plants constantly. So for
yeah,
us, it's just kind of noting what is maybe new and exciting in the trade. If someone has something new that we want to try, and we'll put it in the grounds and kind of see how it performs. And if we think it does well, maybe we'll think about expanding it into our collections. So just kind of trial
gotcha.
and error. That's the fun part of gardening.
Okay, all righty. And now we can kind of open it up to the both of you. Let's see if we can get everybody on here. There's everyone. All righty. We had some questions about disease issues with your oaks. We have a participant, they lost their oaks, well, 15 years ago. It's about 5 or 6 of them at a time. Like, how do you combat the disease issues with the oaks?
I'm happy to talk about some of the issues we have, and then I'm sure Angela's got a whole other list of
Mhm.
things to mention. But so for us, we have a lot of different oak species in our collections.
Mhm.
So we have several big issues. The biggest issue with our red oak collections is bacterial leaf scorch. So it's a bacterial disease that's transmitted through little leaf hoppers that hop around on the leaves and vector it. It's not like a death sentence per se, but you'll notice, particularly in drier seasons and at the end of seasons, if you'll see the margins of the ends of the leaves starting to look really brown, it's probably a sign it has
Mhm.
bacterial leaf scorch. A lot of tree species are susceptible to it. Oaks in the red group are particularly susceptible to it, and that's an issue for us.
Mhm.
We have a lot of issues with fungal decay pathogens on our oaks.
Okay.
They're susceptible to a lot of decay pathogens. Those are things that we just keep a close eye on and try to think about our cultural practices, like being sure not to overwater trees or keep the ground too saturated. A lot of those disease issues are kind of worsened by cultural practices. So those are the big ones for us. We also have a lot of oak borers and have a partnership with the U.S. Forest Service right now to do some monitoring for oak borers in our parks. So hoping to get some exciting data from that and to really keep an eye out for any new emerging invasive insect pests that might be impacting our oak populations.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Angela, can you speak to anything about the black oak specifically, or
Um,
whatever you wanted
yeah,
to address, actually?
so yeah, like generally
Yeah.
oaks, Melissa said she gave a great overview. So really it always
Yeah.
depends on what the pest is, what the disease is, and kind of look at the cultural, what's going on culturally with the plant. Are things too wet, too dry? Look at the environmental conditions that's going on for that time of year. And also too, sometimes if it's a pest issue, maybe sometimes, treating with a systemic is a last resort, just depending upon what really kind of really drilling down to the diagnosis of the issue and what the disease is or what the pest is really one of the biggest, probably one of the biggest factors, just to really know and how to treat what you're looking at. And sometimes you may find out there is no treatment. We need to, maybe it's time for a new plant, or
Yeah.
or find a cultivar or a variety that's going to really do well in that location or whatever it is. And it could be a soil issue, so it's
Okay.
really important to diagnose properly, and find out what the problem is before you just kind of dive in and start treating. So diagnosis is
Yeah.
always the best key to way to start.
Yeah. And speaking of soil, we have a participant who has typical Northern Virginia clay soil. Which
Okay.
of the trees that you all have discussed are best for clay?
Oh gosh. So the soil we have here in the regional garden, a lot of it was brought in when the regional garden was planted in early 2000s. But I have found that many trees are pretty tolerant. I feel like the oaks have done pretty well in a clay soil. I feel like, even I feel like persimmons have done okay with that kind of soil. I'm just trying to think of what else, specifically. I mean, I don't think many things love clay, that deep
Yeah.
clay. Just trying to think offhand. Melissa, what other recommendations do you have for which other trees would do okay in that heavy clay?
Yeah, I think all the trees that I've discussed are like pretty tough urban trees that can handle a lot of like really crummy soil situations. Maples are
Okay.
maybe like a little bit more sensitive, but yeah, a lot of the oaks do well. I mean, ginkgos are like the toughest trees. They can tolerate pretty much anything. And there's a ton of really great trees that we didn't touch on. Witch hazels are really great. Viburnums can handle it. Sumac has some of like the best fall color, and it's basically just like a roadside weed, but they're really lovely.
Yeah. So now we can talk about tulip trees specifically. There's a participant who says that their tulip trees are dropping many more seeds this fall. Is there a reason for this?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I would think that not knowing, I'm just going to like spitball here and say that it could be like a number of issues. It could be like environmental. The tree could be getting some kind of signal to like put out a bumper crop. Could have been a really great year for pollination. And I don't know if there's like, the same way that oaks have a mast year so some years they just have like a large production of fruit. Good question. I don't have a good answer for you though. Sorry.
Okay.
Angela might though.
I was just going to say, Melissa, who knows if it's just, kind of bumper crop or, just kind of what's to come for winter, if, animals and things need to eat any of the fruit or anything like. So it's just so hard to say really, why, when a plant does that, whether, in the fruit, and if it's just thinking about, succession.
Gotcha. So thinking about those persimmons that we were talking about earlier, like how large have your persimmon fruit? How large has it gotten?
So American persimmons typically get like, I don't know, very large grape size. Generally, they're not huge. They're not like an Asian persimmon, like a large fruit, but they're real small, but they're tasty.
Gotcha. Um, and now we're going back to like just some ideas about oh wait a minute, Angela, did you want to answer that? Is there like
Oh,
a
no, no,
the difference? Oh,
no,
okay,
it's
yeah,
just,
and for
I'm all
okay.
good.
Okay, great. We're going back to kind of looking at and diagnosing some like tree diseases. So we wanted to know, is there a way to combat crepe myrtle bark scale? They wonder, should they just cut down the tree? Is there a spray, horticultural oil twice a year? What are your ideas about
Yeah.
that?
So we crepe myrtles are a taxa that we have a ton of on the grounds.
Hmm.
They're planted everywhere in DC and the region. People love them. I will. So our plant health care specialist has been doing a lot of monitoring and research with crepe myrtle bark scale. We saw
Okay.
initially when they first came in that their populations were massive, and everyone was like very excited and up in arms about what they're going to have to do to deal with crepe myrtle bark scale. But like our populations have really diminished over the years, over the past like 3 years, I would say. Um,
Hmm.
we have stopped treating for it. So we were doing like horticulture oils at crawler stage to help treat, but have found that that wasn't even necessary. And more, we've been just thinking about the use of biological insects, so natural predators that'll come in and eat the insect, the little crawler phase of crepe myrtle bark scale. And that has really been working for us to help keep their populations in check. And we haven't really noticed like an extreme detriment to the health of our crepe myrtle trees. We still get a little bit of like black sooty mold and things, but it's, a
Hmm.
minor aesthetic issue for us.
There's an ash with some beautiful fall foliage on the grounds of the Capitol by First Street. Do you treat your ashes for borer?
We do. That ash
Uh-huh.
tree that you're referring to is, I think it's one of our female um, white ash trees that is
Yeah.
actually original Olmsted tree. So it's been here a long time. We
Hmm.
have, I think, 10 ash trees, green and white ash trees left on the grounds, and we do treat all of them every 2 years with a insecticide injection. So that's really the best way to preserve them and stop damage from emerald ash borer.
Okay. Okay. And we're looking at, I'm going through the questions. Want to make sure the folks that hung in there from my snafu get their questions answered. Um, oh, we have a Florida question. Angela, are you from Florida?
No, but I had lived there for a number of years, so
Oh,
I
cool. Okay. All righty.
remember from my
So,
culture from
well,
down in Florida.
what trees can offer fall foliage colors in the South, especially Florida?
So, ooh, that's hard. So that would be more northern Florida, just
Mm,
because you really don't get that drop in temperatures depending upon where they are in Florida. So if they're
uh-huh.
in the Southwest Florida, down by Naples, Fort Myers, that area, you're really not going to get that. Like if you're used to the Northeast fall color, you're not going to get that generally in further south you go in
Mm,
Florida. Believe it or not, plants do have their changes and things down in Florida, but if they're looking for fall color, it's got to be northern Florida. But some maples a little bit, but you're not going to
okay.
have that like pop of like oranges and reds and yellows, kind of like you would typically see, in the mid Atlantic or Northeast. So it falls a little different in Florida, which really
Okay.
surprised me when I was down there. Plumerias drop their leaves. I thought that plant was dying when I lived
Oh,
there. So that's something to keep in mind if the person is new to that area, that some tropicals, fall it hits them a little differently. So,
so do you have any recommendations for perennial herbaceous plants that'll just
um,
make really good additions for a fall garden?
I'm. They could try some. They could put in some chrysanthemums, see how they do.
Okay.
They could do maybe some asters. They could yeah, just kind of experiment. I would say they should visit their local garden centers or nurseries and just kind of ask some of the find out what some natives are that'll give a little bit of fall color too, and kind of seeing
Hmm.
like, hey, what works for that, depending upon what area of Florida they're in.
Okay. Okay. And so now let's go back to maybe a smaller city yard, right? Let's bring kind of back to DC. Are there trees or shrubs that can give good color in fall, but can fit in a smaller city yard? Hmm.
I'm happy to jump in and give my thoughts. There's a ton
Oh
of really
yeah.
great small trees. Witch hazels are some of my favorites. So there are a ton of witch hazel cultivars on the market that have really
Mm.
spectacular blooms in late winter, early spring. So you kind of get a double dose of color, one early spring and one in the fall. Viburnums are really great, more of like a small tree, large shrub. Smoke trees, sumac, aronia is also some really great ones. Sassafras, one that I already mentioned,
Mhm.
is a great small tree. And I bet Angela's got some other really great recommendations too.
Just thought of one. Even hydrangeas, when their blooms start changing and they get that like
Mhm.
mauve pinky color, they're really beautiful, and it's really fun. People will sometimes dry the blooms and then can have a dried floral arrangement too that has that fall color to it. So
Ah,
just bringing the outside in a little bit too. Um,
yeah,
yeah, so you get a little bit of that. I'm just thinking hydrangeas. I'm just trying to thinking. Yeah, viburnums, another great one that Melissa said. Um, yeah, I'm just yeah. So lots of great
yeah.
ideas out there.
Yeah, we have a participant who's not a fan of sweet gums. Okay, they're not a fan. They're actually the bane of their existence. They fill several garbage cans of them weekly through the spring. Just how do you keep grass and sidewalks cleared? What made me think about that was like, hey, maybe we can make him into like a really nice fall kind of decoration. Can we do the same thing with sweet gums? How,
A nice bowl of sweet gum balls on your countertop. Yeah.
you know?
I would say that our gardeners probably and our horticulture staff probably feel the same way, like bane of their existence, particularly
Yeah.
when they fall on the sidewalks and they become a hazard. For the most part, like um, we'll just blow them off the sidewalks and kind of let them decompose naturally.
Okay.
So we don't, and we do pick up like leaves, typically off the grounds in places where they collect in abundance. So if they get
Mhm.
mixed in with that sort of stuff, they get picked up. But otherwise, they just get blown off and are allowed to decompose on site.
Yeah,
So
little compost situation.
yeah,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
I get it. Well, that's why
Mm.
they come out with these seedless cultivars. So
Uh-huh.
you're not alone. People don't like those gumballs.
All right, we have another question about black locusts. There is a participant who's had two huge old black locusts that have died. They're putting out weird mushrooms every time it rains. Is this just from rotting roots? They're still trying to get them cut down, but they have questions about these mushrooms.
Yeah, I love a black locust. Really lovely spring flowers. Great
Mhm.
smelling too. Yeah, probably if they've been cut down or damaged, they've got some type of fungal decay pathogen on them. Without like
Mhm.
seeing the fruiting body, I couldn't tell you exactly what it was. Usually a sign that there's some kind of decay going on there. So if they're not fully removed, might want to have an arborist come take a look at them and give you a diagnosis of what they think is going on.
Mhm.
If they've been removed and they're just stumps, then you don't have too much to worry about, except now you have a fungus tree. So
What about those trees that have laurel wilts? Is it best to remove those?
yeah, if you're seeing laurel wilt in a sassafras or in other trees or species, yeah, it's probably something that you want to reach out to Extension about. It is
Ah, okay.
it is not in our area, I think, as of yet, but it's probably on the way. So I would, yeah, coordinate with whoever, whatever state or respective area you're in, reach out to a local extension. They might be interested to see some pictures and talk to you about symptoms and what you're seeing it on.
Mhm.
So it has the potential, I think, to be extremely detrimental for species in the Laurel ACA, but haven't
Okay.
totally seen the fallout from it yet here. So
Okay. And just speaking of like kind of going back to the bark scale, which predators can be used for bark scale, and are those available for home gardeners?
Good question. I'm probably going to botch this, and our plant health specialist, who is an entomologist, is going to be like cursing me. But so really what we try to do, and Angela could probably speak to this more about their work at the regional garden because it's a much more biodiverse landscape, but is really about trying to create habitat for natural enemies. So thinking about bloom succession and other plants that are going to draw in natural enemies so that you can kind of create that habitat by which they're going to like come to and feel happy and feel like they have enough resources to stay at. We do purchase like green lacewigs and do releases of those to help control crepe myrtle bark scale. Some natural enemies that we see are things like mealybug destroyers, other like little lady beetles that are gonna like really nosh down on some scale. Are great signs that you've got like an appropriate balance of natural enemies to pests.
Yeah.
But yeah, Angela might have thoughts about really great ways to create that habitat.
Yeah, so one of the things I was thinking of, Melissa, was I think one of the predators that we use is the Cryptolaemus, which I think is the mealybug destroyer. So we try to do, high PM, integrated pest management here at the Botanic Garden. And of course, the diversity of plants really helps. We also tried to, when we had to combat the scale on the crepe myrtles, so we did like a lot of hand pruning. We even would like power wash with a hose nozzle, to get the scale off, just to like, if we had to mechanically do that, just to eliminate, try to like, well, maybe we don't have to use a dormant oil or an oil, horticultural oil on the crepe myrtle. So we did a lot of variety of things to try to keep things going. And so, yeah, so there's IPM, there's mechanical measures that you can do. And of course, you could hand scrub it off.
Yeah.
But yeah, a variety of things. And of course, variety of plants really helps too. So really, any of the beneficials have lots of food for, and they could take care of hopefully that pest issue. And then of course, last resort is always, spraying if you need to. So.
And speaking of pests, the ones that we kind of don't want, or maybe we do. I don't know. You all teach me something every time. Have you seen any red spotted lanternflies at USBG or at the Capitol ground?
I don't feel like I have.
Okay.
I've seen them personally at my home, not too far from here. So I don't know what we're doing if I haven't just looked around enough, but I feel like I've been fortunate enough that I haven't really seen them on the grounds here. I don't know if Melissa has seen that.
I think one of our arborists may have spotted one. We really haven't seen them. And we do have like a couple areas with like some ailanthus, on the backsides of parking lots that need to be cut down. We haven't really seen them there either. Yeah, much like Angela, I live in the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia, and they're like crawling all over my house right now. So they are in our area. They are in DC. I just don't think they're out in force yet down in the DC area. So
okay, that might be a good sign, right?
Yeah, I know that
Right.
the National Arboretum has found them multiple times though, so they are definitely nearby.
Okay. Well, speaking of things to also look out for, right? Are there any trees that home gardeners should try to remove? Like if we're thinking about, we just kind of talked about some invasive species, but kind of going back to some of those invasive trees. Are there trees that home gardeners should try to remove? Do you know of ones that are pretty popular that you're probably like, since we're talking about moving trees, maybe we should
I
move that one.
I will say for me, more so than trees, there are a lot of invasive trees, but since we're talking about fall colors, I'll just mention burning bush is like still very popular in nurseries. It does have a spectacular fall color, but it is very invasive. So I would say probably if you have a burning bush in your yard, that's one that you could target.
Okay.
I don't have a specific tree to remove, but generally I try to check out my trees once a year, generally at home as a homeowner too, really looking at the health of the tree, the aesthetics, and also looking at the longevity of the tree, and if it could cause any threat to my home. So just things to look for with your trees at home, dieback, really changes that really look majorly different from year to year, just to keep the trees as healthy. I mean, personally, I don't want to ever remove any of them.
Yeah,
However,
yeah, yeah,
as a homeowner, I also want, the tree to be healthy. I want to take care of my home. And I want things to be just, healthy as possible. But it's always good to, do some general pruning on your trees at home. If you see any just low limbs, you can prune yourself, take care of that. It's good for the tree. It's good for the home. It's, good for everybody. So, and be a good neighbor. Yeah.
yeah. Are there any like practices that might enhance the fall color, or you kind of get what you get?
Fertilizing your trees when you can, and make sure they get plenty of water when we're in any kind of a drought through the summer or early in the season, because really you can, you know, but the health of the tree is really going to kind of determine the color and how much, water it can take up, through the summer and the growing season. So it's like the healthier the tree is, I feel like the better and more vibrant color it'll have. So it's anything you can do throughout the year and the season to really just give the best health to the tree. You'll get that big pop of color, put on a nice show.
Yeah, yeah. Any ideas from you, Melissa? Well, that sounds about right.
No, I mean, I think Angela hit it, like really just
Of
maintaining
course.
the health of your tree and your plants is the best thing you can do to make sure that they're thriving. And aside from that, there's not much you can do to control the length of daylight or, when things start getting warm or cold. It seems like our summers are getting longer and winters shorter. But yeah, aside from just making sure your plants are healthy, that's really the best thing you can do.
Yeah, walking around in the outdoor garden, Angela, I really see the work that you all put in, because it's gorgeous out there. So yes.
Thank you.
Alrighty. For our last couple of moments, do you all mind teaching me something more? I heard these two terms, straight species versus cultivar. Um, just help me out with those terms. What does straight species versus cultivar actually mean?
So they're like taxonomic terms. So straight species is when it's, so let's take red oak, for example. Quercus
Hmm.
rubra, that is a straight species. It is a species that's found in nature, naturally occurring.
Okay.
Cultivars are plants that have been cultivated by people for special characteristics. So when we talk about those sweet gums, I said like Hapdel was a seedless cultivar. So those have
Hmm.
been bred by people to be seedless. So cultivar just means cultivated. And of course, there's other like taxonomic language like varieties or subspecies. So those are all kind of different taxonomic codes that people in the plant world often talk about.
Yeah, and we have a mixture of those in the garden. So let me ask, is there a feeling about cultivars? Like, are people discouraged from using cultivars? Is this like, no, go straight, what is it called? Straight species, or are we open to cultivars? Like, what's the feeling around that in plant world?
I think it just kind of depends what you're going for. I mean, sure, species is great, but I think there's a lot of great things about cultivars too. Sometimes when they've been cultivated by people, it's like, oh, wow, are we looking for bigger fruit or bigger leaves, or what are we
Mm,
specifically looking for? Why that cultivar came about? It's like, oh, wow, look at that, the leaves are bigger or the fruit is better. So it just kind of depends, what you're really, as the plant person, what you're looking for. And if you're like, oh, if you have to be like a purist, like, oh, I only want my straight species,
yeah, yeah,
then
yeah.
so I guess it just depends on the person and what they're looking for in the plant.
And are some of the ways that these cultivars are made by fruit grafting? Is that one of the techniques that are used in making different cultivars, or is that something totally different?
Yeah, so typically, like if a cultivar is developed, a lot of times you try to then asexually reproduce it. So it would be a clonal using a technique like grafting, for example, a
Hmm.
clonal propagule, for example, to make sure that you're getting exactly what you wanted. So, for example, the Jefferson elm, which was originally found growing over by on the National Mall by the Smithsonian, has now kind of been replaced as the most popular elm cultivar to resist Dutch elm's disease. So basically every Jefferson elm that you're seeing out in the nursery trade right now is a clonal reproduction of that one tree that was originally growing on the National Mall. So
Ah, yes, because we're also noticing that some of our cultivars can maybe revert back to the original. We got a couple folks in the chat that has noticed that. Um,
yeah, particularly for like those things that claim to be seedless cultivars, they can often revert back. I mentioned
yeah.
ginkgos. I know some folks have had that same issue with the sweet gums. So you,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
it's a gamble when you decide to use some of these species and cultivars, whether or not they're gonna do what they claim to do. So
Yeah, and speaking of like this mixture, is there also nativars? That's also a question in the chat. There are also nativars, slightly different types found in nature, like phlox, and they're more widely cultivated. Um, yeah, can you all tell us about nativars?
Sorry, Courtney, can you say that again?
Yeah,
Can you?
nativars came up in the chat. So we were talking about cultivars, we're talking about straight species, but then we have this term nativars. Are y'all have
So,
background in that?
yeah, so nativars are typically like a native plant that has a cultivated form. So a lot of our native species, so like sweet gum would be an example, has a number of cultivars that it's still the native species, but they're cultivars of the native species. So there's been a lot of
Okay.
really great research actually done, particularly by like Doug Talmy, University of Delaware, about
Mhm.
like the value of nativars in the landscape, particularly for pollinators, and whether or not some of the morphological changes that happen when we breed plants really allow things like insects and pollinators to access the resources that the native plant would provide. So yeah, I would encourage folks
Got it.
to look into some of his research. Really great stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we can have conversations about trees for so long because, yes, we are looking at the beautiful foliage, but it also causes us to ask so many more questions about the pollinators, about how did they get to be this beautiful, right? About how do we take care of them? What's the best way to do these things year round so that we can enjoy them in the fall? So, this has been fantastic, and we still have more time. We still have more time. We're gonna go all the way this time, okay? I'm not gonna wrap this up. It looks like we had a little warning about ginkgos. Yep, about how ginkgos can put out. Um, yep, they said their ginkgo gum reverted to the original and dropped 1 million gumballs that they just do not trust seedless
I
anymore.
will say, so I know that the District Department of Transportation Urban Forestry Division sometimes sprays their ginkgos. So if you get the timing just right when they're flowering,
Mhm.
you can spray them with what's essentially a hormone that causes senescence of the flower. And so that would, in theory, stop production of the fruit later. We've
Ah,
tried it with some of our ginkgos, and it's not super successful. And for us, just wasn't kind of worth the effort of um, trying to deal with what is a minor nuisance fruit. So
okay. Okay. Has there been, as we wrap up, is there any place in each of you all's gardens and grounds that you're specifically looking forward to just watching and being in? What's your favorite space?
For me, definitely the regional garden. I mean, as you know, the trees grow and they develop and they change color. I mean, certainly just walking through the regional garden just feels like you're in nature. So
Yeah,
that's probably the highlight for me, certainly this time of year.
perfect. Yes, thanks, Angela. What
yeah,
you want to say?
I would probably mimic what Angela is saying. So Senate parks are probably my favorite part of the U.S. Capitol grounds and Arboretum.
Hmm.
They were originally designed with this kind of very formal outline of just red oaks, but as the landscape evolved, a lot of understory shrubs and trees got planted. So we've been thinking a lot about how to really uphold that design intent while integrating a lot more diversity in our collections. So as we start to put a lot more, diverse species and try new cultivars and things in the landscape, I'm kind of just anxious to see how those things perform and how it continues to evolve.
Nice. I've enjoyed this, even though I thought it was over much too soon. I'm so glad it wasn't. Thank you all so much, Angela, Melissa. This has been a delight. Thank you all in the chat and online. Thanks for joining us today. Of course, there'll be a brief survey in the inbox. We appreciate your feedback, and we look forward to seeing you all in programs in the future. Thanks again. This officially closes our program today. You all have a wonderful weekend.